Welcome to the 1000 subscriber special lesson. So I want to first start out by thanking everyone for subscribing to my YouTube channel and getting us to 1000 subscribers. And as a thank you, I would like to have this released 1000 subscriber special where I will teach a lesson on pole shaking, one of the best exercises that I've been taught for conditioning for internal martial arts. So this is not limited to internal martial arts. You can practice with any style, no matter what style or discipline you practice. It is very good for helping connect the body, so which is why I'd like to teach it. So pole shaking is most famously practiced in internal styles like Taiji, Xingyi, and Bagua. And it is essentially a workout routine in which you are repeating a movement like this or like this over and over and over again, trying to develop internal power, connection in the body, and funneling power out of your body. So if this was an opponent, in my case, right, if I grab their arm, I should be able to shoot power into their spine as if I'm doing so with the staff. So without getting any further ado, let's get started with the practice. So practice looks very simple, but can be a little bit difficult to understand at first. So the first and the most easy I find is the horizontal. So you'll just hold your staff, and depending on the length and weight of your staff, you might find that you'll be playing around with where you have your hands to make sure that you can hold up the staff and be shaking the staff properly. So you'll have one palm up, one palm down, and you'll be holding them about shoulder height or so. And then you'll be facing yourself, or facing in the same direction that you're extending the staff. So with this exercise, we're essentially going to be turning back and forth so that I will be extending one palm and then extending the other palm. And as I extend one palm, the other palm comes backwards. So if you watch my hips will turn, and that will cause the arms to go back and forth. So if I take the staff away, I'm essentially just pulling my hands back and forth like this, only this will be palm up. So this is all that's going on in the exercise. So the point is that if I only go forward, right, I'm only going to get forward power. If I only go back, I'm only going to get backwards power. But if I turn, I get a backwards power and then a forwards power. And that gives me the shake at the end. So I essentially just turn my hips back and forth. It's very important that it's your hips turning and not your arms pulling and pushing. So as I get into my stance here, I pump the legs, I turn my hips back and forth, and that causes my arms to go back and forth like this. So that's the exercise on paper. Then for the vertical version, we have like so. It's essentially the same exercise, but I'm doing vertical power instead. So as I turn my hips, whereas before I turn to the right, I go back, the tip comes back. I turn to the left, the tip goes forward. For this, as I turn to the right, the tip goes up. As I turn back, tip goes down. So all this different is, instead of horizontal, we're now doing vertical. So I turn my hips horizontally, that will create this vertical change, because you can see that my shoulder, as I pivot my hip, will pull backwards, which will pull on the staff. And then as I shoot forward, my shoulder pushes forward, which extends this hand. And as this shoulder pulls away, it pulls this hand. So then I get this pole shaking. Then, once I get the pattern of it down and I get the idea of turning from the hips and letting that do the motion, is very important that it's the hips doing it and not the arms. Then I can start to do the practice like so, where you can see I'm starting to shake the end of the staff. So essentially you do this by vibrating with your hips going back and forth. It's a sort of vibration where I'm just pumping this back and forth repeatedly like this to get this. So it's the same motion, just a little bit smaller, a little bit more connected, and a little bit faster. So you can do this on every side. It should be done on every side. But the idea is all the same. So why we do the practice, now that we know how? Well, first, like I said, is to connect the body all the way through. So to do this properly, I can't be doing with the arms, because then I'm only getting power from the arms. It'll be a good exercise for the arms, but it won't be a good exercise for the whole body. So I need to connect to the hips and let the hips drive the force, and that will ripple power outwards to the ground through the legs and ripple power outwards through the arms. And I also need to make sure this is connected as well, so I'm not, say, turning the hips and then I'm pushing this forward, but I want, if I exaggerate the motion a little bit, it's like it follows. So this will go first, and then the chest follows, but it's not in a disconnected state in which they're independently moving. It's more like a whip, a cascade of muscular contraction moving up the torso. So that will give me my connection. So in martial arts, it's important to connect because you want to get full body force, and you can't do so if you're unconnected. If I turn my body, if I use my body, even if I do that, if my force is not connected through my shoulder, it's not going to work. And the way that this practice shows that is that when you're trying to shake the pole, say if I loosen this shoulder a little bit, you can see I'm not really getting the pole to shake anymore, right? But you can see my shoulder shaking a whole lot. This means that this is disconnected. So it's essentially a way to test yourself on your structure as well as to build it in a conditioning sort of way. The part of your body that shakes more is where the power is getting lost. You can think about it like an electrical current, and there's like a breakage in the wire, so the current gets lost here, right? We need to connect those wires in order for the current to go through the system. So in this case, I need to correct the shoulder. So I connect the shoulder by not becoming stiff, but not becoming so lackadaisical that I let it to shake. So I need to make sure that it's connected properly. And this can happen with anywhere in the body. It can happen in the knees, it can happen in the hips, it can happen in the chest, it can happen in the neck even. Make sure your neck is always reaching upwards so you don't give yourself whiplash, especially when you get larger, stronger pulls. So yeah, connect the body. Then it's about Dantian rotation. So Dantian rotation, we think about Dantian all the time, right? There's this area in our gut. And we think, turn the Dantian and we get a punch, right? And that gives us our internal punch. But often what is forgotten is what's happening in return. For every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if we turn a sphere, because Dantian is always talked about as a sphere, when I rotate it, so I'm rotating it towards the left as if I'm turning my hips this way, the right side goes forward, but the left side goes backwards. Now if I rotate it to the right side goes backwards and the left side goes forwards. This exercise teaches that very thing. So if I were to take it without the pull first, right, say I'm going to take this part of the exercise, I'm going to use it as like a block and a punch, right? So this is my pull shaking. We're just going to use this as our analogy. So I don't want to block and then punch, or punch and then block. I want it to be the same motion, coming all from the hips. So the hips move one time, and I get two actions, because everything has equal opposite reaction. So it should not be disconnected to have 1 and 2. It should always be one power. If they get hit by this technique, they're getting hit with one power, just in 2 different places, right? This will hit to block, so it'll be hitting on their arm, and this will hit wherever my target is, but they'll get hit with the same power generation force. So the same as here. I'm not pulling back on the left to pull this, and then I'm urging forward the right to do this separately. I'm letting one be the motion. It's one turn that creates this. It's one turn that creates this. One single turn. So that's really what Dantian's all about in this context. One turn, two forces. One turn, two forces. Always think about it like that. Every motion has an upwards and down. Every motion has a left and right. Every motion has torque. Think about Dantian in this way. Then the very much the weight training part of this, especially when you get into longer pulls like I have back here. This one is about 144 inches long, so about 12 feet or so. So this one is very heavy, right? It's heavy and a lot harder to shake, but still flexible enough to make the techniques work. The idea is that as you get comfortable with the motion, you'll build up to bigger and larger, longer sticks, hopefully still with a bit of flex, so you make sure that you're training properly, because the shaking part of it is part of like what lets you know if it's correct or not, right? Because we don't want this to shake, we want the end to shake, and that gives us our correct motion. But as we build up power, going back and forth like this, right? The power, the kinetic energy for my body that's rippling outwards from my hips are being transferred through the stick. But it's not hitting anything, right? It's shaking at the end there, which means the kinetic energy has to go somewhere. So it will essentially come back. So the kinetic energy shoots outwards, hits the end, and comes back. It's just like with like a whip, right? You crack the whip, the extent to the most power part of the motion is in that change where it reaches its extent and then it immediately pulls back, that crack, right? So as I get to the pole here, I get the power to go to the end of the pole, it will naturally come back, right? So not only is it for generating force to generate within my body to shoot outwards, but I'm also withstanding the force as well. So my structure has to be sound in order to withstand that force. So if I have my shoulder out again, for instance, I would put a little bit of power, right? There's not going to be nothing. I'll put power out there. As it hits back and it hits to my shoulder's going to shake even more. This can usually cause injury. So you want to make sure that your structure is sound, and this is the kind of exercise that teaches you whether your structure is right or if it needs some correction and where the correction is needed. So in the shoulder, for example, you'll notice the shoulder shaking a lot more. So you'll be like, okay, I need to fix something about my shoulder. So it's both like a conditioning exercise for weight training, as well as internal, building the internal. And then it also tells you where your mistakes are, and then how to fix them. And it's really why this exercise is so great, and I suggest it for everyone. Because it's like cheating for internal force, right? Just building up internal force, conditioning, all that. So same kind of exercise even with the longer pole. And then vertical. It's the same. So make sure that, for example, vertical, it's very easy, especially with the longer pole, for as you're going back and forth, for the arms to go like this, you want to make sure that they're going straight up and down as much as possible, because if you just start doing this, it's going to lose the power. So make sure this is going on, and use this whole exercise as feedback for your own practice. So, without anything else, there's applications to be had. Fortunately, I don't have a partner here today, but I have a stick, and a stick is just as good. So, my teacher would always say, whenever catching an opponent's arm, he'd say, "Thank you for the spear." So we're going to picture as if the spear is an opponent's arm. You connect wrist, elbow, or shoulder, depending on where you want to grab them. If you do the pole shaking on an arm here and here, right? Broken arm. Same kind of thing with the shoulder. You can pop the shoulder out. So any type of spear movement, right? You get here, it's getting that arm bar and that dislocated, right? You can power like this to get it to break sideways, power like this to break downwards, you can power upwards to break upwards. So you can apply this in everything. Now that's the most literal applications for it. The ones that aren't as literal is just basically any movement that you have, you're powering that movement with the pole shaking. So we learn how to structure the body, we learn how to deliver force, we learn how to withstand force, and we learn about Dantian rotation. So if I think about it like with an uppercut, right, like this, it's not just here anymore. It's not just here anymore. You can see there's nothing happening here. But every motion has equal and opposite reaction. One goes, the other pulls. Every movement has this, right? You get a chop, one goes up, one goes down. This is in all sorts of long fists. One goes out, one goes the opposite direction. Every movement has this. Rotate the Dantian, and two techniques are formed with one power. It's all the same. It's all about rotating the Dantian. Whether you work in internal martial arts or external martial arts, it's all working with the same body. We all have the same body. I mean, different versions of the body, but we're all working with the human body. So we all have this Dantian to work with. So this exercise is really great for building Dantian, for building connection, and withstanding and delivering force. Because imagine, right? If you can send force through a pole this long, right? So if I can send the force over there, imagine with an opponent, right? It's the whole idea of reaching through your target rather than impacting the target itself. You want to punch through the target. You want your force not to hit the surface and then dissipate. You want it to penetrate. This is building that as well. So we're also getting penetrative force and reaching force. And the longer the pull, the more reach you have, because you have to reach that far with your force in order for the end to shake. Otherwise, the body of this stick might shake, but the end will only shake a little bit. So always use that as your measuring, right? So that is pole shaking. To review, we have the horizontal, so we pull back and forth and get this horizontal shaking. And we have vertical shaking, in which we get this kind of shaking. And as always, based on your physical ability and your training, you can get longer, larger pulls. Make sure not to jump up poles too quickly, because you can get hurt. Make sure you practice safely and smart. All right, once again, thank you again for 1,000 subscribers, and I look forward to creating more content for the future.